This video is actually going to show you how I made a ring with half of a sphere, a bead that I cut in half. I wanted to show you all the possibilities, so I'm starting out with 100% silver, just like you bought. And all the silver that I buy is all from the same place, and it's guaranteed 100%. So in none of the stores they use 100%. I'm using a mold that's made out of carbon, and it's carbon, or it might be graphite, and I can heat this thing up to 4,000 degrees. It can stand so much heat. So I'm heating it up. Before you pour silver into an ingot mold, you must heat it. And one of the things I learned in Thailand is to add a vegetable oil, which helps a lot and keeps the ingot very clean. So it burns up inside there. I'm going to quickly start heating up my silver, and I have this actually speeded up, this footage. And now I'm going to pour it, and you know, the pour is really important. I poured this too fast, and there was a hole in the middle of the ingot after I get done. You can see the vegetable oil burning off. And now I take the graphite mold and just throw the ingot into water. This is a very thick ingot of metal, pure silver. So I'm cooling it off, and you can handle it immediately. And I'm going through my rolling machine in my remodeled shop. I have just the most beautiful workshop. I'm so proud of it. You can see the hole in that plate that I'm rolling. I'm rolling it to about 19 or 20 gauge metal, and the hole will always be there, but I'm just going to cut out a square because I think I'm just going to punch a circle out of this. So this is how I make my own sheet metal. This is how you do it. After you roll it, you have to heat that piece of metal up, and it's the process that you at your bench do over and over again. Anytime you work on metal, you have to heat it up to a light red color and throw it into water. With this thin piece, I have to be very careful I don't melt it. It gets up to temperature. It's red hot right now, and I'm just going to toss it into water. So I punched out a circle, and then I took a series of punches and I went around the outside of it. I don't want them to be perfectly centered, and so I really didn't take a lot of care with the punch. But now I've taken a piece of wire and I rolled it flat because it's going to become the bezel that goes around the stone. And remember, anytime you roll metal, you twist it, you stretch it, it gets harder, and you have to go back to this annealing process. So this is something that you will learn and you'll do over and over again. And that's why you need not to fear the torch, but to use it all the time, because you got to anneal it. Now this little strip lacks a straight. I cut it off, I nipped it off, so it needs to be 90 degree end, just like you're making a ring. A bezel is a ring basically, but it goes around a stone. So I'm using these special curved pliers, and I'm going to make a little circle. And I don't know what size compared to the stone, but I'm just by eye making a little ring that'll go around that stone. So cutting these spheres in half, now you can make a ring. So you see, I'm just fitting it, and the metal is so soft I can actually bend it around the stone and determine. I'm going to make it a bit undersized and use a jewelry saw to get a nice 90-degree cut on it. So I put it in a drill press vise, which I have in my shop on the table. These are my new tables. And I cut the metal at 90 degrees. And then I'll take my file and very carefully control that and make sure it's as close to 90 as possible. So I'm going to actually close this just like a ring, solder it. But I got to get it to the exact size of the stone, so that when you push the stone in from the front, it fits right into the bezel. Now this stone is going to be epoxied using a resin glue to hold it in, and it'll be very permanent. So now, just like making a ring, I line up the sides, bring them together, and it has to be perfect. And this metal's very thin, so it's very easy to get it in alignment with itself. A little flux on both the inside and the outside of the ring, and then I'm going to place some tiny pieces of solder that are actually pretty dark and old, but it doesn't make any difference. They'll clean up because there's flux there. So now I'm taking my bench torch. You can see how nice my new tables are. They're beautiful. I have enough for 8 people at these 2 tables. Each one handles 4 people. So I'm soldering this closed with my torch. And this torch hangs up with magnets, so it's really nice. Now I put it on a small ring bar, and I'm going to make it round with a soft hammer or mallet. And this is our old rawhide mallet. And it doesn't do any damage to the metal, it just makes it round. And then I have to keep comparing it to the stone. So as I stretch it, I want to get it just so it fits over the stone very easily. And I've almost got it. I have to expand it a little bit more and then compare it to the stone. If you hit it with a metal hammer, it'll go too fast and it'll be too big. Once it's too big, you gotta cut it and file it off again and then re-solder it, and that's a lot of work. So here I have to be very careful. I'm using a metal hammer pretty softly on it. I'm almost to the size of the stone right now. So the metal hammer expands the silver much more on a ring bar, a mini ring bar. And you can see I've got it. I got a fit now. And that's great. So now I'm going to solder that to that little punched out circle that I made initially. It has a pattern on it, and I don't want it to be centered. I want it to be a little bit off center. I like stuff like that because it's more individual. If this was from a factory, it would be right in the middle. But since it's handmade, I have the luxury of deciding what I want to do, so I put it on the punch pattern that's on this 19 gauge disc, and I'm going to solder it down now using about 6 pieces of solder. Notice it's off center. Okay, and then I just put in the little pieces of solder all around it, and they must touch the side, so with the tweezer. And this is so good for you, really, because you're learning to do really precision work. And someday, no matter where you work, if you work with your hands, you've learned to do precision work. Notice how dark the solder is. It's because it's old, it's oxidized, but the flux, because there's a coating of flux there, you don't really have to worry. Now, one of the fastest ways to solder when you're soldering 2 surfaces together is to get them up in the air and throw the heat from the bottom. And the solder will melt very fast and go around that whole little ring. And it's seamless. You can actually put a few drops of water in there and it won't leak out. It's completely... You have a little cavity now for the stone. I wouldn't advise you putting the stone in yet. So now I'm going to make the ring, and I'm going to use wire. So I made it smaller than my actual ring size. And I'm just taking wire, very straight wire, and just stretching it around the ring bar smaller than the actual ring. And that's because you can expand it. But when you put a stone in a ring, you can't expand it. Because so I'm going to cut this ring, and the space that's out of it you'll make two side legs that touch the platform when you solder the ring upside down. So right now I'm trying to cut it, and this thick silver is pretty hard to cut with diagonal cutters, and that's a really good one. Still can't cut it, so I may just take a saw to it after I straighten it out. I can put it on my drill press vise. It's a nice flat piece of metal, so it's steel. I can align each ring and make it perfectly flat. And I can adjust it with the pliers so that they're absolutely even with each other. If I'm going to solder them together to make the ring, then they should coincide with each other. And again, I may just cut it with the cutters if I can. This is very thick silver, so I think I'm going to put it in the drill press vise and cut it with a jewelry saw, which is a better idea. You're always going to be thinking about the better way of doing something. You have to come up with the appropriate tools to use. And since I'm struggling with this and I can't cut it, I'm just going to go to a jewelry saw and cut a piece out. Now there's going to be two legs. The bottom part of the ring that goes around your finger is called the shank. So now I put them on top of each other to see if they're close to each other in size and everything, and it looks pretty good. Looks ready to solder them together. Now how are you going to solder them together? That's going to be hard. So I'm going to use the drill press vise, put them in and hold them on just the end, because the drill press vise is steel, and it will do just that. It will steal all the heat. So when you're trying to solder the ring, when you put it in a vise to solder it, there's a setback, and the setback is that the vise will thermally steal all your heat, and it'll take you a long time to get up to soldering temperature. But if you just hold it by the edge, you might get away with it if your torch is hot enough. So I'm applying flux to the area. I'm just going to pin it on one side, then I'll flip it around and do the other side. Once I get it registered with itself, and if you look at the ring very carefully that I made, it's not registered perfectly. And I know that because I was trying to make an example for you this Monday before I see you tomorrow. And so I'm heating it up now, and to get more heat, you add oxygen and make the flame a little bigger. I used powdered silver, so the soldering wouldn't be that obvious, but it's very high temperature silver solder, so it takes a really long time to melt, not like the easy solder that we use in class. There's three kinds of solder called hard and medium and easy. And I tried hard solder here, and the vise is just taking away my heat. So it's really hard to get soldering temperature and for the solder to liquefy and flow between these two rings. But I finally got it to work, and I got the solder to flow. I don't want to fill up the area between. I want to distinctly see two rings. I don't want to, if I put too much solder, I'll fill that edge up in between them, and it won't look good. So now I'm going to take my file and file them to 90 degrees. I've already cut a piece out with the jewelry saw, and now I'm filing the top on an angle, so when it meets the little disc, I actually used a dental unit and a cutting disc to try to get that angle just right. But in the end, filing was probably the best way. Here you see the ring sitting up. It's the rings upside down, sitting on the bezel. I'm putting a little flux on both sides. And then I come in with a torch, and here's where you need finesse. You gotta have a mind, you gotta think a lot when you do jewelry, and that's what's so beautiful about it. This is gonna help you become a doctor or a surgeon. because it requires really good hand skills. I'm applying the solder by hand with a tweezer, but I gotta heat the disc up on the bottom, and then the minute I touch it, if I see it melt, I know I got the solder, and I can add as much as I need to get a nice transition between the ring and the crown, that platform that's upside down. So the solder just flows right in there, and I don't want to put too much, and I just want to add a little bit to the other side. And again, I've got just a tiny piece of solder left. It'll probably take most of it to make that transition in there, and then of course it goes right into the water to chill it. There's no reason for you to get burnt in the class, so always put things in water. Now here's the ring that I made. It's finished, and I took about an hour to polish it in all the areas, and it looks very nice, and it gives you an example of how you can use those spheres.